Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Directors Exchange, brought to you by funeralradio.com and my good friend Tyler Frazier. Tyler makes all this possible, and we just want to shout out and say thanks. Today, I have a special guest who was so kind to free himself from his schedule long enough to join us here for an interview. It's my good friend David Nixon. David, good morning.
Good morning, Ray.
Welcome to you, sir.
Hey, thank you for inviting me.
Okay, my pleasure. I'm going to start out by reading the headline that's on David Nixon's website. And by way of an introduction, I'm going to do it this way. It's going to maybe depart from how we normally do it. But if you go on to David's website, and he's the owner and president of Nixon Consulting, but if you go on the website, the banner headline reads like this. It says, and this is a kind of a mission statement, I think, he wants to help funeral directors improve their future. Think about that. And this is what I found so coincidental about that statement. Here we are at the NFDA convention in Chicago. Again, it's 2019. And what is the theme of the convention? It's all about the future. Interesting. We're seen to be converging on several ideas here. So let me get back here. David, in addition to his work, and I'm going to get more into that from the consultancy and management information standpoint, but I want you to understand he wants to help funeral directors improve their future, and his approach is to look at all the circumstances that go into impacting funeral profitability, and most important, in terms of your long-term goal, and that is, you would say, an exit strategy, I think.
Yes, that's
okay.
right. Mm-hmm.
That's a prime directive.
Mm-hmm.
David addresses all these items in his quarterly newsletter, and I want to add right now at the outset that if you are interested in receiving the newsletter, we'll have a link on our website, on this website, to David's site. And of course, if you are a funeral professional and interested in receiving information from him, you can do so by that standpoint. So, David, I've spent far too much time. I want to get into you right away. The theme is the future. Your message is helping funeral directors improve their future. Give us an overview of what you mean.
Well, Ray, I take some criticism because I deal with some hard topics.
Mm-hmm.
But my feeling is that we have to look honestly at where we're at so that we can decide where we want to go.
Interesting.
And so the future is here.
Right now.
Right now.
Yes.
And if we're not geared to solving problems or finding solutions, then we have no future.
Mm-hmm. If we want to have a future, there's something we need to do now in the present. There's specific things we should be doing. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you say here again, I'm going to just still introduce you. A well-run funeral business should enjoy the benefits of cash flow and avoid the use of leverage or lines of credit.
Yes.
Now, that's prudent, what we call balance sheet management.
Yes.
Okay, so that's
Yes.
a balance sheet concept.
Absolutely.
And of course, you go on to say that well-managed firms reap the rewards from a comfortable bank account. Now we've gone from balance sheet to income statement and cash flow.
Right.
Okay. And that allows them to take advantage of new opportunities. New opportunities is another word for growth.
Yes, it is.
Okay. And this is a subject just want to break for a brief minute because you and I have talked about this before. I think we talked about it yesterday here at the convention. And what's new on the scene in all business and all industry is that the economy has, in recent years, become more financialized. And by that, I'm looking at if growth is the prime directive, growth today has to be financed. It does involve leverage. Expand.
No, well, Ray, I've been looking at funeral home information for 40 years.
Okay.
All right. And 25 years ago, I started an article, a published article, listening to cremation. And I kind of warned at the time that there was a disparity in revenues between cremation and burial.
Yes.
And, some people listened to me and others who said you needed to charge, appropriately for cremation. But many didn't. And they put their head in the sand that,
Yes.
That wasn't going to impact them.
Yeah.
Well, the Cana figures were there. We saw, that it was going to keep growing. So, you talk about leverage. You talk about the financial impact in where we're at now. Funeral service was largely recession-proof up until the Great Recession.
Yes.
And I noticed, and our clients noticed, that people were spending less. They wanted money back from an insurance policy.
Yes. That's very true, by the way. Yeah.
And that changed things. And I think it accelerated the move to cremation and the impact. And now, even though I told them 25 years ago, it's finally hitting home that there's a disparity there. And the average revenue per call has essentially been flat.
Yes.
And that's a real concern.
And I got a quote from you on that. I believe this is your quote. The average revenue per call for our clients, the firms that you service, has hit a wall in terms of growth, averaging just 0.5% annual growth over the last decade or more.
Yes.
Okay? But that's not just your clients. That's the industry in general, because you've done surveys or you've somehow obtained information about the industry at large, and the same statistics apply.
Typical growth rates for a business in the neighborhood of about 3% annually.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
If I had to guess.
Yeah.
2.5%, 3% is pretty good.
That's achievable for most. In funeral service, people from outside looking in several years ago said that we were only growing 2%. And then they retracted that and went down to 1%. Well, that's not really meeting general business needs.
Absolutely.
All right. And then I looked at SCI for 5 years, the last 5 years.
Yes.
And their average cost or funeral service revenue per call was like $5,200. And it's been stuck there.
Yes.
In essence, over that 5-year period,
Yes.
they lost 0.1% annually.
Right.
For their revenue per call.
They've lost that.
They've lost it. They're not growing.
And this is
not that way.
This is what I want to point out to you. If our listeners, if you don't do anything else, please contact David. And I didn't ask you this before, but you're hitting the wall. It was done in 2 parts.
Correct.
Are they available for redistribution?
Sure. If somebody wants, they were actually published in I think the
Director magazine.
Yes.
Okay.
I have copies of those if people don't have them.
Well, I wholeheartedly recommend that you look into that article, because it carries off from where we were just talking about. Now, if you've had a decade of flat to or stagnant revenue and profitability, that's taken quite a toll on your operation, especially if we're still looking at the prime directive as being growth. Chances are there are improvements you like to make to your property, but you're going to be limited to the extent you've got debt outstanding.
Yes.
You're also going to be limited to the extent that you lack sufficient collateral for the loan. The lending, correct me if I'm wrong, is going to have to be to a large extent unsecured, which is going to require submission of financial statements and a business plan.
And personal guarantees.
And personal guarantees.
Yeah, actually.
Therefore, to the extent you don't have any of that at your excess, you're being closed out the market for expansion and growth.
Well, you have to.
It's a threat to your survival.
It is, Ray. Not to belabor the the downside, but like I said earlier, let's talk about these real problems, all right? If the growth is stagnant, expenses aren't. And I think
Exactly.
what I found in that article is like 1.4% annually growth in expenses. You have to at least keep up with that.
The expenses outstrip the revenue.
It can.
Then you actually, the net worth of the business is in a declining situation.
Well, you're going to see the shrinking profit, the bottom line.
Yes.
And that's going to impact the equity in the firm.
And David, this comes at a time. I don't know if this statistic comes from you. 65% of the small business, and that includes funeral service, will be retiring over the next decade.
There's been many, that have published that it's going to be a big change. And I've seen it even most recently. More people are calling and looking to do something because they're burned out.
Yes.
Or they're just at the point where, hey, I'm done doing this. I need to do something else. But they're not ready for it, right? Because financially, they haven't saved, they haven't built the equity, so their business worth could actually be declining.
Less. And that's your nest egg. You have over 70-80% of your retirement tied up in a business that's shrinking, and you're talking about an exit strategy. Valuations have been negatively impacted by this trend over the last decade. And here you are going into your retirement years and facing a substantial, I guess, difference in what you had anticipated all along.
Well, we see the cases where some owners they've hung on long enough, they can't retire.
Yes.
Because they can't enjoy their lifestyle that they've been accustomed to.
So they're stuck.
So they're staying. And they're staying probably longer than they should.
And they're staying in a facility that probably, in many cases, could use some leasehold improvements. Paint job, a kitchen, a dining room, off-street parking.
Yeah. I tell people, do a drive-by of your competitors.
Yes.
All right, and look at the curb appeal.
Yes.
Because a lot are in a position where they're deferred maintenance.
You can tell they are.
And they're just postponing it.
Yeah.
And they're just enjoying not doing that financially and keeping the proceeds, okay? And that might work for a while, but eventually
you're eating your own lunch.
The building needs to get remodeled, updated, okay?
Right.
A new buyer's going to come in and say, well, wait a minute, you haven't put that new roof on.
Right.
All right? You need new carpet. You know, the list can go on and on.
Right.
Of all these things, and I'm going to subtract that from what I'm going to pay you.
The offering price.
Yeah.
And I just had another thought that I hope I can. Maybe I'll come back to it. But you're shopping for an offer, and if the facility is facing functional obsolescence,
Yeah.
got a casket room that the portion of the facility that takes up, the return on that investment is subpar. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I don't know that we need casket rooms anymore.
Well, there you go. There you go. So this gets back to what you were saying before. The real estate has become divorced. It's not playing a historical role. Today, if you're going to operate a facility, the cost of carrying that real estate, your business model must generate enough cash flow to service the debt and retain earnings.
Well,
but go ahead.
The problem is on the real estate side is many people don't understand that the real estate should be growing and should be providing revenues. All right.
So what do you mean? Explain. Go into the.
All right. Well, when you see a firm that's made, let's say, 12% profit.
Okay.
But they're not charging themselves fair market rents for that facility. Guess what? The 12% is not totally real.
That's right.
Because part of it was
they're overstating.
Yeah. They've got a real estate component and they've got an operating entity, a funeral home business. Well, they're tied together. And so they have to actually look at it and say, I've got an investment in real estate, I've got an investment in a funeral service. Some cases, Ray, the real estate has appreciated in value so much that they're more a realty company than they are a funeral home company.
Than they are a funeral home. David, this is It's a really interesting concept. I'm going to need you to help me out here because we're still on the subject of real estate. And I'm reminded of something that I was told recently, and someone was saying that the funeral homes, they were talking about the corporates, they got the prime real estate.
Yes.
Their customers are generally better off financially, so they're not dealing with the lower income population so much as you might say middle tier and up in terms
Okay.
of a customer. On that basis, the corporates say, we got the prime locations, we got the prime property, we're not worried about competition because the barriers to entry are so insurmountable for the new entrant. And I know what you're thinking right now. I'm going to say, that's assuming that funeral homes are going to look the way they are down the road, the way they are today. In other words, you told me earlier, you don't need an embalming room. Then what are the funeral homes of the future? How are they going to look? Is it going to be a fancy ground level facility spread out with nice parking, a banquet room, and dressed up display that's sunny and bright? You show video monitors around the room, AV situations to set up, for singing, musical instruments and things like that. That's not a significant barrier to entry, I think, because you can take a restaurant and maybe do.
That's been done.
Yeah,
it's been done.
So we talked about this over coffee, and I was surprised, and your listeners may be also, because you're a finance guy. You may be the only certified management consultant to funeral service.
That's probably true.
The only one. And here you are. You say we don't know what the competition is going to look like down the road.
Right.
And barriers to entry, for all practical purposes, then don't really exist.
Yeah.
You clarify that for me.
Let me go back a moment to the real estate.
Okay.
All right. I've written about the real estate paradox. All right. And that is when the value of the real estate today, fair market value of the real estate, is on par, matching the revenue that the funeral home generates without cash advance influence. Then you become more of a realtor
than you
are a
funeral
Right?
provider.
But to get back to your question on the future, all right, I envision a future with a smaller physical footprint. Do we need 20,000 square foot facilities? I don't know that we do, because I don't think the public's supporting that.
Okay.
All right. They're voting with their pocketbook.
Right. The overhead to carry a facility that large.
Right.
Is
Some of the people
overwhelming.
I've talked to in the high cremation areas, they say they only need about 3,000 to 5,000 square feet.
Yeah.
That's all they need for that model. Any more than that, then it's coming off the bottom line. They're not going to make it.
I remember when I traveled to Seattle as a guest of the Inland Empire Funeral Association. As you probably know, out on the Northwest, in the Northwest, the cremation rates are off the hook.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
75-80% cremation.
And most of it's direct.
Yes. Visited several funeral homes. Almost every funeral home had a retort in the building. That's par for the course.
Right.
And this reminds me of a conversation you and I had years ago, in which you said, here in the Midwest, as compared to Seattle, those guys have been getting by for quite some time with cremation rates that high.
Right.
What is it going to do to the markets that haven't? Maybe they just might be at 50%, cremation rates. Very likely down the road, they're going to get into the same kind of a circumstance that you're seeing out on the coast.
Coast, yeah.
Right? Yeah. is, do we still have time? From a standpoint of timing, how, in essence, how soon must we begin really addressing this?
25 years ago.
25 years
We
ago.
needed to
So we're
address it.
kind of behind the curve right now.
Absolutely.
And the
We've gotten
industry
behind.
is in desperate needs to catch up.
Well, it needs the innovation, all right? It needs some newness. I said the other day at an FDA program that I was part of, we're not a burial business anymore. We're a cremation business, and we need to adjust to that.
Just face the facts.
Yeah.
This is a cremation industry.
It is. It's a profession that now focuses primarily on, and if, individual towns are not 50% or higher cremation, they will be.
They will
And
be.
I talked to a guy yesterday who was only 4% cremation in his area, which is phenomenal these days.
It is phenomenal.
All right. But he knows where it's coming or going. And we need to plan that way.
Mm-hmm.
If we're getting average revenue per call of $6,000 or $7,000 now,
Mm-hmm.
how's that business model going to work if we're only getting $4,000?
Yeah, because you're saying peak revenue per call is essentially here.
Yes.
That's the situation
Yes.
today. So it's going to be down
Right.
going forward.
And the problem in my mind, Ray, is that we've given consumers the choice of one door. Which door do you want?
Okay.
Burial. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it isn't that. It's not just cremation. I wish we'd not even focus on whether it's a burial or cremation. Focus on why the business is there. It's to serve people who have suffered a loss. Let's not worry about it. We can price what we want. All right. Cremation probably should be higher than it is. Burial probably should be lower. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've been, in essence, burial's been subsidizing cremation at many
I
farms.
got you. I
all right?
understand.
So we need to say now, this new business model, let's just focus on satisfying families
Mm-hmm.
and not worry about what they choose, because if we're worried about the bottom line so much, it becomes the focus and not the reality of what they need.
So if you worry about the bottom line too much, you're focusing on the wrong thing.
That's the wrong metric.
So nonetheless, there is a hierarchy of needs, because the other things that may be less important, they still remain critical.
You can't ignore the bottom
You can't
line,
ignore them.
but you should have enough margin of profit, all right, that you can withstand somebody choosing something that's less expensive.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
The margin for error. 30 years ago, right? The margin for error was great because everybody
Absolutely.
bought caskets and
Yeah,
vaults.
yeah.
They're not buying them today like they were.
Also, you could just look in your bank account and you didn't have to do no account. If I got a hefty balance, it looks like it's higher than the outlays I've got to make in the next week, I must be doing fine.
You know, my focus for 40 years has been on the operational side, not the financial strictly. It's, you know, how can we tweak the business to make it a little bit better, a little more profitable? And we haven't really addressed a lot of those issues. But we're being forced to now.
You're being forced to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're now at a point where you have to be a better business person. It's just mandatory. And I think what we're going to see, and going back 40 years ago, I saw clients then that were close to 50% cremation, and many of them are still around. They kept their debt load very low. Doesn't mean they haven't reinvested in their facilities.
Sure.
All right.
But they were able to do that.
Yes, they've been able to do it.
Now, but that was, I'm assuming they didn't go into this situation as sophisticated business people necessarily.
Not necessarily.
But they were able to see the handwriting on the wall and knew that I had to do something.
They listened to their market. And
Yes.
they adapted with the change in their market. All right. I think the future is going to be good, great
Absolutely.
for somebody who's financially sound,
Yes.
solid.
Yes.
And unfortunately, that's not going to be the majority in my
That's not going to be the majority. So then You say we should have started correcting this corrections process 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So here we are at this stage of the game, and time is really running out fast.
Yeah.
So if one wants to start what I would call or institute a program of recovery, then probably the best thing they could do, and I'm not trying to plug an ad for you, but it's to contact a person like yourself, because you're going to start them out on the process of what they
Let's
need to
look
do.
realistically. And
Yeah.
they're not just myself. There's others out there too
Yeah.
that can be called. They just need to have a heart-to-heart.
But you know, a heart to heart, and where does that start? We talked about this earlier. If someone is going to do business with you, what do they have to do first? They got to send you financial statements.
Oh yeah, I've got to see
You've got to.
tax returns, financial statements, call volume information, including cremation breakouts. You know, what rate are they at, and where are they going?
What if the guy doesn't have that?
Unfortunately, I see that a lot of times.
So can they give you an envelope with all the receipts and stuff? Are you going to
no.
bother read?
No.
You will instruct them to contact an accountant. Okay. Or do you ask first that they submit what they have about their business,
You know, if they give
so you can assess the quality of accounting?
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to have detailed financials necessarily, at least at the beginning. You can develop those, all right? But you need to say, all right, even if it's just a tax return, because some people don't even have financial statements.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it is.
But in an environment that's pre-financialization, that wasn't
It wasn't. And the
so
margin,
big a factor.
And the margin for error was so great, they didn't have to worry about
You
it.
couldn't be sloppy and still get back.
And they were.
And they were. Okay.
And some still try to be.
Okay.
You know, it
So
doesn't
then
work.
we've got to, first of all, address the financial statements and get a reasonable idea of where the business stands.
Well, it's reverse engineering, Ray, when you come down to how do we build a profitable business? What profit are you looking at?
Okay.
All right? Subtract out what expenses you think you're going to have.
Right.
What your cost of sales might be, which is declining, incidentally, because fewer caskets and vaults are being sold.
Yes.
But what revenue do I then need to generate?
Decline
produce
cost of sales means higher gross profit.
It could.
Okay, but then the rate of expansion and expenses is chewing into that.
It can.
Such that the bottom line becomes relatively minuscule.
It can, but if you start backwards and say, I want a 10% profit or I
Yes.
want a 20%
Okay,
profit,
okay.
how do I, and my expenses are 80%, all right?
Right.
Cost of sales is maybe now it's 13% or 10%,
Right.
all right?
That leaves what, 7, 6
Yeah. What kind of revenues do I need
to
get
generate?
there and get to that 10 or 20% profit? It's a backwards approach. It is reverse engineering, but it can be done.
Okay.
The problem is sometimes what I have to tell people is you've got to raise your prices a lot in order to do it. Or,
They must be scared to death.
well,
to
if
do
you
something
can't
like
grow, we talked about the revenue
Right.
per call. If we can't grow there, what's the real alternative, Ray? We've got to get more calls.
You're right.
That's very difficult, but I have a feeling in the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be easier
To get more calls.
to get more calls for the firms who are financially sound now.
I see what
Because
you're
they're going
saying.
to weather the storm.
The weaker sisters are going to actually be just turning over their, what do you call that? Capturing market share.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
okay.
going to have to capture more
Market share.
We got to grow one way or the other.
Yeah.
And if we can't grow per call, then we have to grow calls. And that's extremely difficult in this profession.
You know, I at the convention yesterday, I was so honored to meet some of the more senior guys, the ones who have retired. These are the kids that are running the firm now and what have you. But it was interesting talking about, you know, in the heyday, how they operated. And they really confess. They feel fortunate because they got out they did a self-assessment and realized that what it would take to go forward in the future, they didn't necessarily have.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But the kids were there, or a long-time employee was able to, I don't know, somehow they did negotiate a sale. But you don't want to take personal notes from the buyer, do you?
Well, it depends on the individual
I'm
situation.
sorry, I didn't mean to throw you off.
No, you're right. I mean, in the 90s, people were told, don't take, don't loan, don't carry the paper for somebody.
Right.
Because the prices were real high, the values were a lot high.
Yeah.
And we're inching there now, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Values are inching higher now for good firms. The firms who have not deferred maintenance, all right,
they're on top.
they're at the top of the heap.
Right.
And they get the higher multiples, the
first
higher
choice.
Turnkey, because somebody doesn't have to come in and do all the remodeling and everything
Go back
else.
and address all
They
those
have
issues.
a distinct advantage over the people who have deferred maintenance.
I see.
All right. So the values are rising, and for some, but it won't for others. Some are still stuck in the 90s and saying, well, I should be getting $20,000 per call or whatever it is. And that doesn't hold true necessarily.
We only got about 10 minutes.
All right.
Fascinating discussion. Still a whole lot of things we didn't cover, but I'm sticking with my mission today was to showcase you and try and maybe stir some of my fellow owner-operators out there who are considering that time is running out. They know what's going on. They're just scared, I would imagine. Deer in the headlight? No.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk, Ray, and to share, but I think many are in denial.
They're in denial.
They're just they're deferring their maintenance and they're deferring their decisions.
Okay, let's try and hone in on this. Of the percentage that may be operating in denial, are you able at all to offer what proportion of the universe of practitioners that might constitute?
I don't have an exact number, Ray, but I'm going to guess
Could be
over 50%.
Over 50%
are not really ready. Okay, if you're going to exit your business, the last 3 to 5 years are the most critical.
Critical, exactly.
Right? You've got to make the changes to make your business look attractive.
Yeah.
And I'm not just saying, fake this or fake that. It's got to be real.
Okay.
And it's got to be measured in profitability, unfortunately.
Okay. Therefore, time running out, for the sake of our owner operators out there who know they've got to do something, maybe not sure what it is, but you look at the last 3-4 years, if you look at your income tax statements, the trend should be very evident.
Yes.
So I got to consider contacting someone for help.
Yeah.
If I contact you, are you going to cost me an arm and a leg? Or how?
No, I don't tend to do that.
Put it to you this way. In the process, we want to turn around an operation, okay? Take me through the steps that you will perform for a client, if you will, please.
What we need to know right now is what is today's value of the business.
Okay.
What's the net cash flow? All right. You can talk about EBITDA multiples and you can talk about revenue multiples. It's net cash flow.
Yes.
And then what's expected cash flow, anticipated, what the future is going to hold. You can impact, once you have that barometer, okay, the benchmark of where you're at now, to let's make improvements that can help the bottom line and make it look more attractive. Yeah, it's not just all about raising prices, all right? It's about looking realistically at expenses. And knowing, I talked with a firm just the other week who knew he was spending more on personnel. Well, he was spending 5 or 10% more. That's a lot. That's coming right off the bottom line.
If it's quality personnel, it should pay off, though, right?
Well,
but
you can
I'm
have.
just. What do you
You're
think?
right, and I firmly believe that you got to pay good people well.
Right.
All right.
Right.
But I'm wondering, and he's investigating whether he has too many people.
Too many.
Too many.
Then that means that this is an owner that doesn't have to spend that much time in his business. He could.
Yeah.
Some days he may not even want to come in at all.
Right.
He's living a good life, David.
Right.
Yeah.
And
but he's burning his nest egg.
He could be if he's not watching the bottom line.
Okay.
And you always need to have a cash reserve. I think you mentioned that earlier. What's a cash reserve? Well, I use what I call the Buffett factor.
Okay.
All right. Warren Buffett, everybody knows the Oracle of Omaha.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
He reportedly, by analysts who look at his business, he keeps 2 months of revenue on hand in cash.
Working capital.
But it's not just 2 months of expenses. It's 2 months of sales, of revenues. And I've seen firms that have worked to get to that point.
They can do that.
They can do it. It takes discipline.
So to get from a point like that to a point where you just described, guys are going to be clueless unless they do find someone who can serve in an advisory capacity.
They can do it themselves, Ray. They got to be honest with themselves.
You just got to be honest.
Yeah, you got to be looking at exactly what.
Do I have time to screw around doing my own inquiry, or do I? I'm not trying to send you customers, but I'm thinking if the situation is this dire, I need to act fast. I may not have time to, take a course or study. So I want to come up with a plan within a 6-month time frame.
It depends on what your exit plan is.
Yes.
All right. We had guys 2 or 3 years ago that were in their 50s that were burned out and ready to leave, but they didn't take into consideration you can't get Medicare hospitalization coverage. They're 65.
That young, yeah.
How are you going to bridge that age gap?
Yes.
And so some of them had to go back to work, even though they were really not mentally ready to go. They weren't financially ready either. So It takes 2 points. You got to be financially and mentally ready to exit.
Okay.
But it really depends on the financial side a lot, because if you can't afford to retire, you're not going to.
Okay, so here I'm going to make a bold statement. I hope you can respond to it. Again, for the guys in a situation where things haven't been doing so well for the last few years, got some ideas, but he's not sure. He's got to prioritize all the different things he can, the steps he can take. Then you need professional help.
Well, you need somebody else who's going to look at it and give you an honest opinion.
Okay.
You may not like it.
Okay.
You need to
so let's go back to the process of initiating a recovery or turnaround. And you were just starting. You started with the financial statements. I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let you finish from there, and how we get from uncertainty towards certainty, at least as far as the business plan is concerned, and you've got something that you think is executable. You understand my question?
Yeah, but it's not going to happen in a year. Usually it's going to take a couple years.
How long before we start laying out on paper, well, this should be our goal then, if it's going to be more than a year? This is what we want, 6 months? Do you do it in stages?
You can. Sometimes the problems that we see aren't that drastic. It just needs a little fine tuning.
Okay.
All right. You can do that pretty quickly.
Okay.
All right. If it's a major problem, and sometimes, Ray, they're just not fixable. I mean, if they don't have a lot of revenue because they don't have a lot of calls, their choices are limited on what they can do. So those are some of the challenges.
So then in that case, you want to trim costs.
You got to be realistic about the costs.
You got to be realistic.
Yeah. So
and the most immediate way to address costs, you and I both know, is to lay people off or cut staff.
Yeah, I don't
so staff is unnecessary.
I don't like cutting that one. All right?
Yeah. I understand perfectly.
It sometimes
puts more weight on those who remain around and increases the level of burnout, especially if you don't know what you're doing.
Well, there's an old saying, I can't remember who said it, you can't cut your way to profitability.
Yes.
All right?
Yes.
I think you can to a point, but it's all about right-sizing your revenues and your expenses and getting to a point where you're generating a decent profit so that someone who might want to buy it sees there's evidence of a history of profitability.
Okay. I want to leave the listener with some idea as to what they can anticipate about this process going forward. And I've interrupted you. Sir, I apologize so much. Just wanted to get a handle on this. I'm a funeral operator. My revenue, my profits, revenue's either stagnant or down. The expenses have gone up. Net profit margins are decline. I don't like the trend because the profit margins are smaller. That's the trend. I'm going towards smaller profit margins. I got to act. So I'm going to contact someone for advice. And if they contact you, you're saying it's going to take a longer amount of time. What are the stages? I'm trying to get an idea. The guy out there who's kind of feels in a pinch, what can he expect if he or she contacts you like right now?
Well, the first thing we do is analyze
Okay.
where they stand
Yes.
compared to our client figures. All right.
Your client standards, because
Yes.
you have a client base, a proprietary base,
Correct.
where that information is shared and stored, and you're able to establish benchmarks.
That's correct.
God, I wish I would just shut up and listen. But
We separate,
Okay.
the S corps information because they're different animals
Absolutely.
than the C corps. All right. And I have those benchmarks to
Do you
say
have sole props as well?
there aren't hardly any anymore.
Okay.
I mean, I run
okay.
across them now and then, but
Okay.
it's most are a corporation of some
Okay.
kind. But the point is, all right, you're spending more on marketing here than what? Are you growing volume? If you're growing volume, then spend all you want on marketing.
It's
okay?
because it's a return.
Yeah, you're building,
Positive
so that's
return.
positive. But if you're not, then if you're spending more than 5% of your revenues, that could be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
You could be throwing money away. So it can get down to that, basic. How much are you spending per call
Yes.
on personnel?
Yeah. Those
right?
are things
Or
you
benefits.
need to know.
Yeah, you need to have an idea of that.
Mm-hmm.
So once you establish, hey, this is you're doing well in this area,
Sure.
you're not doing well in this area. Let's tweak that area and get that improving. But that can take a year before you realize, the benefits of change.
Yeah, but if you're talking about a 5-year time frame, that's 20% of the problem out the way.
Ray, you need 3 to 5 years of solid financials, so you actually need to be planning before that.
Yes.
All right? You need, in essence, what we talked about is they need to be getting, on their stick now, because that's the only way that they're really going to be able to do it.
Do you have time to take calls from prospective clients and do exploratory discussions? Is that
I do.
That's I don't see a big bright smile on your face when you do that.
Well,
I'm just
I
wondering,
do.
how do you generate a sale? Go ahead. I mean, respond any way you can. I mean, you're the source of information that can make all the big difference. But you don't knock on doors.
I don't advertise.
You refer. You base your business growth on referrals.
Correct. That's it. I do a lot of writing, but if you notice, my writing isn't the sales pitch. It's really more about sharing information.
Analytical aspects.
Yeah. So your question, Ray, was people calling. I'm at a point in my career when I can choose the people that I work with.
That's
I'm very fortunate.
Great place to be.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's taken me 40 years to get there.
To do so.
Yeah.
By the way, this is your anniversary was last year?
This year. February.
40 years.
40 years working with funeral directors. My whole career, essentially.
Anybody that's invested that much time, I got to feel you're intimate with industry.
I've told people that I lost one brother when I was 10 years old. And that kind of paved the way for me, I think, in this.
Interesting how those stories, narratives like that lead people.
And I had an interest ever since then. And it just kind of worked that way. But the industry is full of great people. Great people.
They mean well.
And they do such a valuable service. The problem is that there are a few bad apples like there are in every, and I've seen some. We've all seen them, right? But they're really, funeral directors are great people.
Yeah.
And so,
but you can be a great person, but if you're not a great manager,
but see, Ray, that's where I've been filling the need for 40 years.
So so you help round out the equation.
Right. That's really been my goal.
Yeah.
And
well, I've been receiving your quarterly newsletters for a while. You and I communicate all the time,
Yes.
by email and what have you. I come to you, I bounce off ideas, and I just want to say it's been such a great relationship. And I've been getting your newsletter for years, Dave, and I got to admit, I've got a background in finance
I know.
and business,
Yeah.
and I still look forward to receiving information from you because you've inspired me to look and consider different approaches. And I can't thank you enough. And I hope my audience, my listeners, will at least take some steps. If maybe first thing, at least getting hit in the wall.
Yeah.
Which is, you said, is in the Director magazine, and if
I
a
have
funeral
it.
director should ask you for a copy,
Right.
it's a part 1 and part 2.
Correct.
At least read that, and I believe the decision whether or not to ask for help will be clear in the outcome of that.
I think you're right, Ray.
Listening to cremations is another great one. I've got so many. I don't have them right here in front of me, but the topics and subjects are fascinating. And like I said, business is not taught in the mortuary college. The next best thing outside of going to a business school or taking a business class, as far as I'm concerned, is to read your newsletter.
I appreciate that, Ray.
And sir,
I spend a lot of time on those.
I know you
but
do.
I want you to realize, and this is, people have commented, they think sometimes I'm writing about them.
Yes.
Right? And I actually am, because the issues and the problems that I see with my clients facing,
Yes, sir.
those are the things I write about.
Yes.
They give me the stories.
They give you the stories.
Yeah.
Excellent way to close. And sir, I want to thank you for that so much.
Ray, it's my pleasure.
It's mine. I just, that's
You tend to look things like I do, open-minded.
Yeah.
And there are other possibilities.
Yeah.
And there's possibilities in this industry for the people who are smart.
Well, it's like you and Alan Creedy, another guy I'm going to interview today. You both have said the same thing, only in different words. You see a golden age funeral service in the future. I mean,
Well, I think some have said the golden age has already gone past. But that's tied to caskets and vaults.
Right.
Now
The
we're on the
future.
new phase.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, we know people are living longer.
Yes.
You got more time to plan or do or take other steps
Yes.
to address measures. It's almost like grace, if you ask me.
But if we don't take action in this industry, we got new people coming in that don't have the barriers of entry to get into the business anymore.
Right.
All right. And they might actually define funeral service.
There you go. Yeah. And that's why, I agree. Unlike what the corporates boast, that the barriers to entry are so insurmountable, we're not worried about competition. Nothing could be further from the truth.
They're getting
your lunch is subject to being eaten every passing day.
Yeah, the
by
barriers.
somebody with some idea.
The barriers are falling.
Yeah.
Because finally we're at a customer orientation where we got to do what the customer wants.
Yes.
They don't have to do what we want.
There you go. David, like I said, we could easily go on forever, but I just want to extend my hand, sir. I want to say thank you. It's an honor knowing you, and I think it says a lot about your own character when you've set aside a mission for yourself of helping others to become more successful. And what probably makes that so much music to my ears is that your model has ended up in your not having to advertise, not having to seek clients at all. It is growing organically,
Yes.
so to speak. Tribute to your, credit to your way of doing business, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray.
Okay, we're through. To everyone who listened, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. And please do make some sort of effort to touch bases with David, at least let him field some questions or answer some of your concerns. We're over and out. Thank you again. Goodbye.